Here's my assessment of Everett's and Pastor Ray Curry Jr.'s perspectives in the respective November 29, 2024 episodes of Ohio for Freedom and the Unction. Thorough Assessment and Parallel Analysis, Part 1. Introduction Context of Everett and Pastor Ray's respective programs. The shared focus on accountability and critique of religious institutions. Their distinct tones and approaches, with Everett offering a measured critique and Pastor Ray engaging in a fiery denunciation. Everett's content in Ohio for Freedom 1. Criticism of Christian media. Everett scrutinizes Christian television networks like Daystar for their perceived commercialization and scandals, e.g., Marcus Lamb's affair and alleged PR manipulations. The focus on Johnny Lamb's leadership and allegations of misuse of ministry resources. Everett's methodical dissection of historical examples of abuses in Christian media. 2. Spiritual abuse allegations, highlighting manipulative spiritual practices through audio clips involving Johnny Lamb and Jimmy Evans. Everett's call for transparency and reform within religious networks, emphasizing the church's integrity. 3. Jimmy Evans and fixer culture, critique of Evans' role in handling controversies within Daystar. Assertions about the systemic spiritual and financial exploitation within the ministry. Pastor Ray's content in The Unction 1. Personal and spiritual accountability. Pastor Ray's scathing denunciation of Daystar and Johnny Lamb, calling her a deceptive Athalia figure. His deeply personal narrative, blending lived experiences with sharp theological critiques. 2. Systematic abuse and power dynamics. Pastor Ray's recounting of Jonathan Lamb's handling of a scandal involving his child. Allegations of Johnny Lamb's spiritual manipulation, using divine authority to silence dissent and shield misconduct. 3. Institutional hypocrisy, comparing Daystar's practices with broader church abuses, emphasizing the corrupting influence of money and unchecked authority. Drawing the parallels focus on accountability. Both figures insist on the necessity of exposing and rectifying abuses within religious organizations. Everett leans on historical and systemic perspectives, while Pastor Ray adopts a direct, impassioned, and scriptural stance. Critique of leadership, shared disdain for Johnny Lamb's alleged actions, portraying her as emblematic of broader institutional failings. Focus on financial impropriety and manipulation of spiritual authority. Call to reform. Everett's plea for humility and systemic change complements Pastor Ray's fiery demand for scorched earth accountability and adherence to biblical principles. Part 1. Expanded. Introduction. The context of Ohio for Freedom and the Unction. Everett and Pastor Ray Curry Jr. both use their platforms to address alleged misconduct and abuses of power within Christian organizations, focusing on high-profile cases like Daystar Television Network. Everett delivers his critique on Ohio for Freedom with a mix of dry humor and a systematic presentation of allegations. In contrast, Pastor Ray's The Unction is a fiery denunciation rooted in scripture and personal experience, targeting not just the actions, but the underlying systems that allow abuse to flourish. Despite their stylistic differences, both voices converge on themes of spiritual abuse, financial impropriety, and the exploitation of divine authority to manipulate followers. Their narratives resonate as urgent calls for reform in religious institutions, albeit with varying tones. Everett adopts a measured critique, while Pastor Ray takes a fervently confrontational approach. Everett's content in Ohio for Freedom 1. Criticism of Christian media. Everett's critique of Christian television networks centers on their shift from ministry to commercialization, a trend he views as detrimental to the church's integrity. He references historical failures in Christian media. Everett cites examples like Jim Bakker and Jimmy Swaggart to argue that these organizations often prioritize financial growth over spiritual accountability. Allegations against Daystar. Specific accusations include Marcus Lamb's extramarital affair and the misuse of ministry funds to maintain personal luxuries, which Everett uses to underscore the disconnect between their proclaimed mission and actual practices. 2. Spiritual abuse allegations. Everett highlights audio clips suggesting manipulative tactics by Joni Lamb and spiritual advisor Jimmy Evans. In one such clip, Joni dismisses personal convictions of others in favor of submission to her authority, raising concerns about cult-like control. The invocation of alleged spiritual curses further exposes the potential for abuse masked as divine instruction, a practice Everett finds deeply troubling. 3. Jimmy Evans' role as a fixer. Everett criticizes Evans for his complicity in managing controversies within Daystar, framing him as emblematic of a broader culture that shields leaders from accountability. This, according to Everett, perpetuates the cycle of exploitation within these institutions. 4. Everett's call for transparency. His overarching argument emphasizes the need for Christian organizations to operate with honesty and humility, urging leaders to prioritize the gospel over personal or institutional gain. Pastor Ray's content in the Unction 1. Personal and spiritual accountability. Pastor Ray's approach is intensely personal and theological. Condemnation of Joni Lamb. He likens her to Athaliah, a biblical figure who sought power at any cost, calling her out for manipulating her family and followers while fostering a toxic authoritarian culture. Direct language. Pastor Ray does not shy away from provocative terms, framing Joni's actions as fundamentally ungodly and harmful. 2. Systematic abuse and power dynamics. Jonathan Lamb's struggles. Pastor Ray critiques Jonathan Lamb's handling of allegations involving his child, arguing that his reluctance to confront his family stemmed from what Pastor Ray terms preacher's kid syndrome, a mix of familial loyalty and indoctrination. Theological exploitation. Pastor Ray highlights instances where Joni purportedly invoked divine authority to shut down dissent, a tactic he labels as spiritual abuse. 3. Institutional hypocrisy PPP. Loan allegations. Pastor Ray criticizes Daystar's acceptance of a $3.9 million PPP loan, alleging that these funds were misused to purchase a private jet, further exposing the network's financial priorities. Cultural impact. He connects these actions to a broader trend of hypocrisy within Christian organizations, where public piety masks private impropriety. Drawing the parallels. 1. Shared focus on accountability. Both Everett and Pastor Ray demand greater transparency and ethical leadership within Christian institutions. Their critiques emphasize the responsibility of leaders to embody the values they preach, particularly when entrusted with the spiritual and financial support of their followers. 2. Critique of leadership failures. Both voices converge on the failures of Joni Lamb, painting her as emblematic of institutional flaws. They highlight her alleged financial misconduct, manipulative leadership, and the broader impact of her actions on Daystar's reputation and mission. 3. Calls for reform. Everett's approach. He advocates for systemic change through transparency and humility, envisioning a church freed from the corrupting influence of media-driven commercialization. Pastor Ray's approach. He insists on immediate action, urging viewers to adopt a scorched earth policy against abuse, leaving no room for compromise when children or vulnerable individuals are involved. Conclusion of Part 1. This comparative analysis underscores the shared urgency in Everett's and Pastor Ray's messages. While their styles differ, Everett's is restrained and analytical, and Pastor Ray's is impassioned and confrontational. They align in their unwavering demand for accountability and their vision for a reformed, integrity-driven church. In Part 2, I will delve deeper into their theological arguments and the broader implications of their critiques on religious culture.